Okay, well, I think we're at 12 o'clock, so we should go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody that's joining us live in person today, and for those viewing the recording, welcome to you as well. This is another in the series of webinars provided by the Center for Renewable Energy Advanced Technological Education, or the CREATE Energy Center. We are privileged today to be joined by Dr. Mark Hanson. Dr. Hanson earned his bachelor's degree in economics at Harvard and his MS and PhD in environmental studies at the University of Wisconsin. He was executive director of the Energy Center of Wisconsin for many years, and he is currently director of sustainable services at Hoffman Planning, Design, and Construction. Mark is the author of a new book titled The Inevitable Solar School, which CREATE recently featured in our spring newsletter, and I highly recommend the read. He will speak with us today on the topic of solar schools. Please welcome Dr. Mark Hanson.
Well, hello, everybody. And Ken, thank you for that introduction. I'm getting quite a bit of background noise from coming back through here, so I'm not sure what that's from.
Yeah, I just saw a huge wave of static come across too. I don't know, Gabby, is it possible to mute other microphones from your end?
Yes, I'll work on it.
I'm suspecting someone is in a car, possibly. There we go. Well, thank you, Ken, for that introduction, and thank you, Gabby and Ken, for all your work with CREATE. And just as a reminder, perhaps if you're listening, if everyone could shut their microphones off, that will prevent us from picking up miscellaneous static. Gabby, why don't you move to the next slide? So, by way of an introduction here, I'm going to really speak to a couple main themes today. And one of the main themes is really how we are so ready in the United States to proceed, and I would say globally, with a massive implementation of solar energy in our schools. And the question in the face of that statement is, why is that notion, why is it portrayed as being such a daunting idea? And I would note some of the evidence that is out there that we are ready for a massive implementation of solar is that PV systems technology is highly developed and already very affordable. And that affordability is a key theme in today's presentation. What we are really looking at in the schools that we'll be considering today are schools that were initially built at regional cost averages for conventional schools or less. And the solar systems, as you will see, that are being put on are being included in those costs as we calculate them. In some cases, it's included in the purchase cost of the school. In other cases, it's being provided by third-party investors. In any event, our upfront costs are very low. And of course, if you've got a school with a lot of solar or zero energy, zero net energy levels of solar, you're going to have low operating costs. Our supply chains are highly developed. The financial tools for doing the analysis at schools or other commercial buildings are there. Education programs are emerging to support renewable energy, and shout out to all the work at CREATE as being one of the important supporters of renewable education in the US and beyond. And finally, investors have entered the market. So I think what we're facing is really an issue of myths and fears to a large extent, rather than factual-based reasons we shouldn't be proceeding. Abby, go ahead and move to the next slide. Just a couple pieces of background here. This is a depiction of what our trend has been in module prices. And you can see from this trend, both in terms of the prices and these are logarithmic scales on both sides here, but on the module average selling price, you can see that enormous drop. Even projects that we were doing solar on back in 2008 and 9, you were looking at panel prices that were up around $3 and $4 per watt. And today, as we look at that, it's more like 40 cents, 50 cents a watt. And of course, what we've seen at the same time is the amount of shipments of solar PV panels is just exploded. This next diagram is a diagram that shows just how much solar resource we have across the US. And at the very bottom of this diagram, you'll note there's a scale. And on the left in the blue and purple colors, in terms of kilowatt hours per meter square per year, scale kind of is at the low end at about 1,000. At the upper end, it's about 2,500. And on the lower right of the image there, you can see where Germany fits into this. Germany's pretty cloudy. And if you look across the lower 48 states as depicted here, virtually every place in the US has got better solar than Germany, which is, as probably most of you know, well ahead of us in terms of solar PV implementation. Bottom line, there's a lot of solar energy for us to work with, and it is obviously widely and nicely distributed in the US. We can go to the next slide. So this image portrays what we should be looking for. And this is an image on the cover of the book, the Inevitable Solar School. And this happens to be from one of the case studies. This is in Northland Pines School District in Eagle River, Wisconsin, far northern part of the state. Part of the state that at this moment, as we do this webinar, is deeply covered in snow. And despite losing some production from snow cover, you will see as we discuss this among other case studies, they are doing very well financially with their solar. So this is what our future should be looking at on a mass scale as we go school to school, whether it's ground mount or roof mount, combinations thereof, and certainly parking solar as well. Next image, please. So if we're looking, taking the context of a school, and let's say whether you are thinking about a new school, a remodel, or you're all set on the, if you will, the school building, but you want to be adding solar, what are your procurement options? And as we look at this, they will vary from state to state. They will vary within states. So you always have to be looking at your particular situation. But their basic options are to directly purchase. A second option is to use third-party investors for on-site PV systems. And there's a number of devices out there, financial devices. You can have energy services agreements, equipment loans, power purchase agreements, rent-a-roof programs is one term for the program where the utility is often the provider and owns the solar system and just rents your some space on the school roof or on adjacent land. Or there may even be cases where there is remote PV system sites and you'll have something called a sleeve tariff that you will arrange to be able to access that power or the revenue generated from that power, solar power system. Then there's another form of third-party investors and investment, and this is situations, and it includes some of the ones we've just listed, but it provides options for you to have third-party investors, but then for the school district to be able to buy out the system. You'll see some of these, an example of this with the energy services agreement at Northland Pines when we get to that case study in a few moments here. Performance contracting, where you're using your energy cost savings to pay, if you will, for the cost of your system over time, is another form where you will have third-party investors with an option to purchase. And one of our other case studies from California use that, and we'll be looking at that in a few moments as well. Next slide. So just a note in the book on the 5 case studies for zero energy schools. One of them that we'll be looking at today is Northland Pines High School Middle School in Eagle River, Wisconsin, as well as 2 other schools that they have, and we'll be looking at those momentarily. And those are a situation where they are partway to zero energy now and are now planning what will be the next steps that will take them closer or even all the way to net zero energy. A second case study is Discovery Elementary School in Arlington, Virginia. This one has received quite a bit of attention. The audience may be familiar with the school, new school, and in their case, they did a direct purchase. A third case study in the book is Jeffrey Trail Middle School in Irvine, California. This one is partway to zero energy, and again, they will have the option as they go through time to move all the way to net zero energy. Fourth case study is Newcastle Elementary School. This is a fascinating one because it's so typical for many of our small rural schools. You've got an old building, you've got a small district. You would say perhaps the cards are stacked being able to get to zero energy with a 1950s building, but we'll see how they did it, and did it in a very affordable way. And then the last case study is Richardsville Elementary School, and in their case, they did a direct purchase on their solar. Let's go to the next slide. So starting off with one of our case studies, we're going to look at jump right into the solar systems that were implemented at Northland Pines School District. At the high school, middle school, it was done with an energy services agreement. So outside investors really purchased most of the system. There's a small co-ownership by the school district to make this work in Wisconsin's rather restrictive situation on third-party investment. And this solar installation was put on a 250,000 square foot school completed in 2006. At the time, the school district was very keen on using renewable energy, but it was simply pretty unaffordable at the time. We're all familiar with how expensive solar PV was over a decade ago. And it turned out that wind might have been an option, but they're right down off the end of the runway of a nearby small airport. So that was not going to be an option either. Their site energy utilization intensity at 66.5 kBTU per square foot per year. That's their actual data from 2013. They went ahead and implemented 160 kW DC roof mount and 70 kW DC ground mount. So they've got a combination, and we'll be looking at that momentarily. The adjacent elementary school is 100 kW DC ground mount, also added in 2017. And at Land O'Lakes Elementary School, for reasons we'll see in a minute, they had to go with a rent-a-roof program, and that was just implemented earlier this year after some delays in working out the arrangements with the serving utility that is the owner of that rent-a-roof. Go to the next slide. What's interesting about the Northland Pines case study, it's really an example of how school districts or private schools can think about how to deliberately plan and phase your solar implementation. In phase one, which occurred in the case of Northland Pines School District, it occurred beginning in December 2016 and went until April 2017. And interesting in that case, the school district did not have cash on hand. They did not want to go out for more referendums to do this purchase on their solar systems, but they were very open to the notion of third-party investors. And in this case, they didn't need a single penny up front. And between some grants for about 14% of the system cost that are available within Wisconsin, and then the third-party investors, they were able to fund the entire cash flow. So phase one was looking to see what might be feasible. With those positive results, the school board was very eager to then go into phase two, which is to say, can we lock in the incentives? Can we competitively bid the system? And can we arrange the financing? And that all took place within the course of 3 or 4 months between April and July. And during that time, we did get the formal bidding. The final designs came with that competitive bidding. And at the end of that phase, they then said, this is all lining up. There's no reason in the world not to proceed. And then the implementation took place beginning in July. And the system was installed by the end of November, just ahead of the snows in northern Wisconsin. So you have your final contracting, your installation, your interconnection, system startup. And that was done at both the high school and elementary school. As noted, the rent-a-roof program took longer. So this is an aerial view of part of the high school. You can see where the roof-mounted portion is shown on top of a field house. And that was the layout that was presented for the bidding. If we can go to the next slide. This is now an image from on the roof during the installation. And you can see what that solar system looks like. The aerial view on the cover of the book that we showed at the beginning of this presentation is of that same set of array of panels. The ground mount systems are shown here in this image, and now this is behind the adjacent elementary school. And in this case, the area within the red box is the ground mounted panels that serve the elementary school just to the left of the image. The panels shown outside of the box are the panels that serve back to the adjacent high school. And so that's the solar arrangement there. We can go to the next slide. And this is an image of those panels. I would note, for those of you in snow country, that one of the advantages of these kinds of ground-mounted panels is that you can have the steeper angles. And you can see the height of those panels off the ground, so that as snow accumulates, you get a chance to melt that snow, have the snow slide off the panels, and help keep your winter solar production up. And we would note that as schools, particularly in more northern latitudes, head for zero energy, that having ground mount panels with very steep angles is very helpful, both for shedding the snow, but also for generating more power in the winter. It helps kind of fill out your annual calendar for solar. We can go to the next image. And finally, this is the solar system, another ground mount. It's a rent-a-roof program. Obviously, those panels that you can make out in that image are actually a ground mount system recently installed and started up this year. Next slide. To give you a sense of how to do the financial analysis, or a way of doing it and portraying it, This is a financial analysis for part of the Northland Pines high school school district systems. This is for the high school, middle school, as well as the elementary school located in Eagle River. And what you show in the blue is your annual cash flow. And as noted, the school district did not need to have any money down up front. The planning services that they used to help put this together, it was rolled into the financing for the overall project. And it's kind of obscured by your red cumulative cash flow line. But basically the story is year one, it was estimated to be a small cash flow positive. As you get to year 12, you'll notice a dip. And what that dip is about is that is the first option for the school district to buy out the system at fair market value, perhaps about 25 cents on the dollar in year 12. The school district does not have to do it, but if they choose to do it, after that point, you'll note the boost in your annual cash flow. You're no longer paying your third-party investors, or if you will, you're no longer paying your mortgage on your solar, and all the cash flow is yours, apart from, of course, maintenance that is included in these estimates. And you see the cash flow takes off to a very robust cumulative over $700,000. This was how it was presented to the school district and to their board. And if we go to the next image, this shows, well, what were the actuals? And what we have in this table is we show for, this is now a portion of that project, the high school, middle school portion. And you can see before the solar and some energy efficiency measures that were done, you can see the annual electricity use of 1,509 megawatt hours per year in 2016. After the solar efficiency and some demand management measures we did with the solar, you can see that annual electricity use was dropped by a third. It's slightly over 1,000 megawatt hours. You can see on the annual utility cost that the cost has dropped from $160,000 plus to, in 2016, to about $85,000 in 2019. Now, of course, you are paying the solar investors some money here for as they would expect in earnings on their investment, and that's about $27,000. So if you do the arithmetic here, the school district is saving between $48,000 and $49,000 per year because of this investment. And as you would probably note there, we've exceeded the financial estimates. And doing financial estimates, we tend to be on the cautious side. We'd rather under-promise and over-deliver is not a bad way to do this. You can see an important aspect of this is how we've reduced the annual monthly demand peak of the school building from averaging 468 kilowatt in 2016. We dropped it to about 365 kilowatt on average. So we're going to move on now and look at some other schools and their situations. Here's some data information on the Discovery Elementary in Arlington, Virginia. This is about a 99,000 square foot school, opened in 2015. A 496 kW DC roof mounted system. It was sized for zero net energy to go with their ground source heat pump systems. And I would note that if you are in a situation where you can influence either the design of a new school, or you are at in a moment where you can possibly reconsider and replace existing and perhaps obsolete HVAC, heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems, going to heat pump systems is a real advantage here. You take the natural gas out of the picture. And natural gas, both for the carbon dioxide emissions, but very importantly, the methane emissions that comes with our natural gas systems. It's a real advantage for going to zero energy to be able to really walk away from the natural gas side of things. And that's what this school designed to do right from the beginning. As noted, they did a direct purchase of the solar, and it was sized to meet the needs of the school. In evaluating that design afterwards, they found that indeed they had overbuilt the amount of solar they really needed. So they now have the very nice situation that they are a net plus school. They export more energy to the grid than they use. An interesting aspect of this, a couple things in terms of their process, is they weren't quite sure when they were bidding out the school construction, was there going to be enough funds left to do the PV system. So they used what is called an alternate bid. And so you're sending the signal to your bidders that, well, we may not be able to do it, but in case we can, we want to see what your bids are. And as it turned out, they had the budget left to do it, which they were very much intending to do, but they were just hedging their bets and were able to proceed. It's interesting in this case, the cost of their system. It was about a $1.5 million system, or a little over $3,000 per kW, or over $3, if you will, per watt. And it couldn't help but notice in writing the book, the contrast to the Northland Pines PV systems that were done just 2 years later at about 1,500 kWdc. I think that really may speak in part to difference in the solar markets in those two areas, Washington, D.C. area versus northern Wisconsin, and probably lower cost structure in Wisconsin for doing solar. But it also may speak to the ability that if you are doing solar, you should always, at least I would recommend, based on our experience, to competitively bid the final design and installation, if possible, to try to reach the best pricing on that. The school has a remarkable site EUI at 15.4 kBTU per square foot per year. That's really quite a nice number. Obviously, it's all on the electric side. And so just credit to them. I would note that unlike Wisconsin, which has a much lower net metering threshold, Virginia has a 500 kW AC net metering threshold. So they could do financially quite well going up and meeting the entire load. At the present time in Northland Pines, if you went that far without batteries, you'd have to sell an awful lot of power back to the grid at avoided cost, which is not a very high payment. So at the time Northland Pines did their system, they had to somewhat limit the size to reach a very good financial performance. As they look ahead now, bringing in batteries will help, in the case of Northland Pines, get around this issue of not having a high net metering. 22 states allow net metering of 500 kW or more, and I'd note that some states vastly exceed that 500 kW limit. Next slide. To give you a sense of what cash flows look like in the case of a direct purchase, like Discovery Elementary, I didn't have their data or know if they even looked at it this way, but I did create in this image an example of a solar project we are involved with right at the moment in the upper Midwest, where in this case it's a 250 kW DC system. The school district is planning to use their own funds. And you can see, obviously, at year one, you dip into your pocket, come up with $300,000 or so, a little more than that. And you can see in their case at the rates they're facing here, it's going to be about 13 years to a simple payback. Internal rates of return nicely in the above 10%. But anyway, that's a very, really contrasts this issue of how does the cash flow look when you need to reach in your own pocket versus using third-party investors who, by the way, do leverage the 30% this year, 26% federal investment tax credit. Next image. Oops. Can we go the other way, Abby, on that? Thank you. There we go. The next school that we're going to look at briefly is the Jeffrey Trail Middle School in Irvine, California. So we're in right in Los Angeles area, and this was a 75,000 square foot school completed in 2013. Unlike the previous two case studies where the solar was either going on the roof or on the ground, in the Jeffrey Trail case, they went at a parking canopy at 423 kW DC. And in their case, they will never own the solar, unlike obviously Discovery Elementary owns it right from the get-go. Northland Pines will be buying it out in year 12. In their case, this is a power purchase agreement, and it's something that is available in roughly half of our states. You can do a power purchase agreement where you simply have a different owner of the solar. You agree upon a rate that you're going to be buying that solar from, as long as you are, and of course you want to get a rate that is as far below your current rate you're paying the utility as possible. But it's a power purchase agreement with SunEdison, and ownership will never be in the hands of the school district. I would note that with ownership, of course, also goes the operation and maintenance. And so that's one of the things that you can consider is whether or not you'd want to maintain these systems, or are you more comfortable with third-party investors and leaving the ownership there. The Jeffrey Trail Middle School is certainly taking advantage of the California net metering threshold, which is at 1,000 kW AC. From the beginning of this project, it had plans to add battery storage under SoCal Edison, Southern California Edison, the incentive program that is underway, being rolled out. And I actually have not checked in very recently as to the status of this, but that is clearly their intent. They have a site EUI of 29 kBTU per square foot per year. You know, if you compare that to Discovery, that sounds, well, that's almost twice of Discovery's site energy utilization intensity. But I'd note that this does include a small amount of natural gas. This school built in Los Angeles was, again, a very thin budget, below regional cost average. And as part of that, they achieved that by going with some lower cost HVAC systems, rooftop units. And they do have a modest, very modest amount of natural gas heating. With the solar they have installed on site, their net site EUI it's at about 17, according to the reports. I don't know of a date that they have in mind for a transition to full zero energy. Next slide. The next school that we'll be mentioning, and this is the last of the case studies we'll be summarizing in this presentation, is at Newcastle Elementary in Newcastle, California. And it is, for those of you who may not be familiar, it's a small town, a little bit northeast of Sacramento in the foothills. As you can see, this is a very small school, 31,500 square feet. So of all the schools that we've looked at here, this is by far the smallest and by far the oldest, 1950s. And I would note that it went through significant renovations on, again, a very lean budget. In fact, remarkably lean budget. And they had some real problems at the school in terms of some unit ventilators in their classrooms that were terribly noisy, some daylight systems that were not working well at all, way too much glare, lack of comfort. I don't know this for a fact, but in our work with older schools, you often see indoor air quality that could be better. We'll just leave it at that. I don't know if that was true in this case. But they leveraged incentive programs with a very limited budget, in part using California Proposition 39 Zero Net Energy, the pilot program, through PG&E. And they, by participating in that program, they had to come up with their renovations that kept their EUI, Site Energy Utilization Index, at 20 kBTU per square foot per year or under. At the completion of their project, their estimate was that they would be in at a site EUI of 14. So again, a very good number on this. And they used, in their case, performance contracting to provide for third-party financing in their 108 kW DC ground-mounted system. In their case, we often see when we're doing solar systems that the roofs are sufficient to carry load up to 4 to 5 pounds per square foot. In the case of this old school, the roof was not sufficient to do this, and so they looked at adjacent land on which to put their ground mount system. The school is on the New Buildings Institute's emerging zero net energy list of schools. So a great success story, and it's so good in part because it shows what a very limited budget, a very small school district, what they can do. Give them all the credit in the world. If we could go to the next one, Abby. Just a reminder, so we've been talking all energy and energy savings, energy costs, financing, all that, and how to fit it within a school that is headed for zero energy at conventional costs. But this, this image here is a reminder that energy is important, but education's important and perhaps more important. And at all of the schools that we're involved with, and I believe just about any solar school in the country, sharing that information with the students, the teachers, the community, versus with software such as eGauge, which happens to be shown here, is an important and essential element. And in talking with these schools, it's interesting to see how the schools are being viewed as living laboratories to help teach the students about renewable energy systems and what it means, and as part of their STEM education. So a really important thing to be very deliberate about, and certainly in any of the solar projects that I'm involved with, this is always an important and exciting topic, and you hear back from the school districts how the students are responding to this, being able to see their systems and see their data in real time delivered over their websites and all their mobile devices. Next image. Well, all of this may sound like it's very, forward-looking, modern, current, and so on, but I was really enjoyed this this quote from someone who was thinking about these things long before today. And so I just note that as a bit of perspective on what we're doing, and it is time that we are tackling this and tackling it on a massive scale. Next image. So what do we want to do to make solar schools commonplace? And I think I would just sum it up with a few comments. One is understand your context, your community, your school, who's your utility provider, what are your net metering rules, what are your incentives, what can you do in your particular area? Because you've got to, each school is sort of a unique situation in terms of their profile of energy use. Hopefully, if you're getting to work on a new school, you get to control that. It's an all-electric school with heat pumps. But you've got to start out with that understanding. The next step is to consider your funding options and optimize your financial performance. You know, there's a tendency in some places to think if we could just get a solar system at our school, we've done our job. And that's a great thought, but I'd encourage us to take that further, which is to say, how do we optimize the financial performance at a given point in time? And if in your state, in your region, in your utility, if you're constrained right now, think about what's the first good step with good financial performance. And as you take that step, plan for when you'll make the next steps to move to zero energy. And as you do that, also, of course, consider the educational benefits. I would highly recommend considering a very deliberate, it doesn't need to be, as you saw from the example, it wasn't a real long one, but it was a very deliberate, incisive planning process. And I would encourage competitive bidding because it can make a big difference in your cost. I think the bottom line here from a financial standpoint is don't leave money on the table. Next, think about your anticipate and use. Anticipate and use technological advancement in what's going on with solar PV systems. You know, we're seeing changes in inverters, in the type of systems. We're now looking at some bifacial PV systems, and we're now looking at battery systems. And this is particularly if you're located in a state that has no low net metering threshold, such as some states do, the case of Wisconsin being an example. And so think about how to bring these in, and I note that in our practice, we are bringing in battery systems now. Zero. Zero energy schools is the destination for many schools, I'm convinced. It's not going to be for every school. You will have certain restrictions in certain sites, maybe forested area or a highly wooded area that maybe have far too many trees, so you can't locate solar right at your school. Or you may have shading from adjacent buildings. You may have multi-story schools, not very common, but they do exist. So you sometimes are restricted from zero, but for many schools, substantial solar for most schools, and for many schools, zero net energy is a destination. And finally, I think the encouragement is to do it. Just do it. The time has come. The advantages are there. The tools have emerged. It's time to move ahead. I think the next slide then. So I'd be happy to take any questions, comments. Was there a question there?
Mark, thank you very much for the presentation. We're getting some static on the line yet. I think some folks are having trouble with their microphones.
Okay.
If anybody has a question and you're having trouble with your audio, go ahead and send it to me via the chat box, and I'll be happy to relay it to Mark. I did have one here, Mark, that came from one of our participants, and maybe I'll just preface this as you know, Mark, CREATE works with teachers in all 50 states and actually in 3 U.S. territories. One of our participants was asking, if you look around the U.S. as a whole, are there regional differences with respect to solar schools from one part of the U.S. to another?
There certainly are. And although, the broad trend is you're seeing a lot of solar beginning to come into schools across much of the country. You do have, though, some states that have been particularly forward-leaning in terms of incentive programs to encourage solar. And you think of a New Jersey, or you think of which has done a lot. California has got a lot of solar. And of course, in California, with your ability to use power purchase agreements, there's been a terrific amount of solar in schools that has been done with power purchase agreements. A lot of it is in carports or parking lots. So you have the benefit of both the solar, but also shading vehicles from heat and sun. So yes, there is variation in terms of just how much solar is coming in, how quickly. But I would say that there's certainly evidence that it's expanding rapidly in most of the country. Of course, we're starting from unfortunately a rather small base. So it's good to have quite as a result. In some cases, it's quite a rapid growth.
Oh, we got a lot of feedback there all of a sudden. I've got another question here from the chat box. I'll try and give you, Mark. It says our nonprofit offers schools a 5 kilowatt educational solar package, and cost seems to be the biggest deterrent to going larger, as well as not knowing how to approach it. Do you suggest working with solar installers directly to learn the options or processes, or is there some sort of a guide that you can recommend to help?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the I would comment that at least in in the Midwest, there's a lot of good solar providers that we see, and you can certainly approach a single solar provider. The difficulty or the warning on that is if you lock in with a single provider and you're going to stay with, and they're providing some early assistance, which is terrific. One of the constraints then becomes maybe an obligation, whether it's formal or informal, that you will now buy a system with them. And what that takes out of the picture is the competitive bidding. And sometimes the differences in cost between competitive bid situations and non-competitive bid situations can be very large. So in that point, if you are working with a single one, it becomes an issue of, well, could you get a sense of your pricing in the area, and then you do a one-on-one negotiation for a price that kind of reflects what the going rate is. Let's say it's a 300 kW DC system. If you can get a sense of what those are being installed at in the region, you should sort of negotiate with your sole provider down to that point. On the other hand, if you can work with someone that will work on planning solar systems, and you'll note just an example, at the very initial page of this presentation, it said Madison Solar Consulting. That's a firm that I wanted to give a shout out to, credit to, and they provide solar planning services where you would do a preliminary specification of optimal sizing and locations and things like that, and then do a formal solicitation where you're bidding out. And that can be a very good way to go, because then you do get the competitive sources. And of course, you would qualify your bidders to make sure that they've got good reputations, that they're past projects, and indeed they have experience with projects at that size. If you are in a situation where you can't consider, this notion of third-party financing where you don't need to have your own money up front can really be freeing in terms of getting a much larger solar install. But if you're in a situation where you can't use third-party, access to cash, referendum, or otherwise is very limited, obviously you could be very constrained at the moment.
Oh, we got a lot of feedback there. It seems to come in waves. I think your point about the competitive bidding is key, because depending on what state you live in and depending on your district, many of our schools are required to go out to competitive bids. So that's important to keep in mind. There was another question that one of our participants sent to me on the chat box. You mentioned the decline of solar costs over the last decade or so, and that it exceeded, most industry projections. If you were to look out another 10 to 15 years in the future, are there trends that you might be able to foresee, or what sort of energy development should we be watching for?
I'd have two comments. And one comment is I think that in the case of the solar PV system, that I would not expect too much more decline in the cost per kW of solar PV systems. I mean, there could be a little bit more. We're perhaps a little concerned right at this moment today with, if given events with the coronavirus in China, if we might have some restrictions on Chinese exports of some of our solar. So there is there could even be a little uptick, but we're at an awfully competitive place now, where I do foresee a lot more cost decline, though, is in battery systems. And there's some data out there that's very much showing this. And that is going to, if you're in an area where you don't have a good high net metering thresholds, and you need to move to batteries to be able to increase your solar system sizing, that decline in battery pricing, and I'd also say the growth of microgrids are two things that I think I anticipate and will be very beneficial to particularly parts of the country that can't leverage the net metering.
All right, microgrids and energy storage. We're going to watch for that. One more question actually two more questions for you here, Mark. First one is, if people are working with a school that's building a new building, they typically don't have electric data to work with to know what the kilowatt hour consumption might be. Are there any sorts of guidelines or metrics that you could recommend for calculating or predicting consumption for a new school that's being built? Say one suggestion was a kilowatt hour per square foot or kilowatt hour per student or something like that.
Well, if you go to your design team, I would note two things. One is, in any new school that we've ever been involved with, and others that we would know from other school projects I'm familiar with, your HVAC designers are always going to be modeling the school in one way or the other, because they have to do the sizing of the heating side, of the cooling side, of the air exchange side, So they should have a pretty good idea of what to anticipate in the school. And to get their state building permits, you've got to submit that information. So you know they're doing that work. And of course, if you're at all considering, LEED certification or green globes or following any of those standards, you're going to be doing simulation models, throughout the year. And that type of modeling can be very beneficial, because then you match up your sizing of your solar for what the building is going to be doing, or is going to be estimated to be doing. So that's exactly what happened at the Discovery Elementary School, just to pick an example, where you've got a new school, they're designing from the beginning, they're asking how much solar, they run the simulation model. Now in their case, they overestimated the energy use, but close enough. And and if you overestimate, you become a net plus school. If you slightly underestimate, you could always add some more solar later. So that would be the path I would take on that. Use the modeling, and again, if you can get someone who's got experience in this modeling, that's looked at solar as well, that may sharpen up the modeling a little bit more. That past experience with past projects. You'll find in the case studies, all of those case study schools, they all were using modeling to guide what they were looking at in the solar.
We have a question here about financials, Mark. When you have, in your experience working with schools, is there a metric that schools tend to focus on? Is it the cash flow that's the most important? Is it the return on investment? Is it net present value? And is there sort of a range that seems to be what is necessary for a project to go or not proceed?
It's interesting, and there is some variation in that. And I would note also, we occasionally run into schools in our experience that it's pretty shocking how little attention they pay to their energy bill. We were visiting with a client a week ago that they didn't know, for their electric bill, which meters went with which buildings. And we were pretty shocked, but I digress there. Just help me out with that question again, Ken.
Yeah. The question was, when the schools are looking at the finances, is there a metric that they tend to focus on? Is it like the cash flow, or is it return on investment? Is it net present value? And then so what sort of range is like necessary in order for most schools to proceed? What kind of return is required?
Right, yes, and thank you. And so for some schools, if they're really cash strapped up front, it becomes a no-brainer if you can say, look, we can get you going into solar using third party, no money up front, and cash flow positive year one. This is sort of the situation at Northland Pines. And that becomes a no-brainer. So for them, the positive cash flow, no money up front was the key thing. They would have been willing to sacrifice some internal rate of return or so on to be able to achieve that. Other schools will be more, they'll be very interested in that internal rate of return. If you can get up at, 9-10% or above, they just think about, well, what can I go get right now on my CDs or something? And, that's kind of popular knowledge, and it's pretty low. Maybe if you're in a state with a good credit union, you might have a percent and a half, and they see, oh, we could get 8 or 9 or 10, 11, 12%. That's a pretty strong case. In some modeling tools, they really have a lot of net present value emphasis. I'm thinking of NREL's SAM model, National Renewable Energy Lab, that used net present values. We tend to present our results in 2 or 3 different ways. We like to show cash flows, we like to show internal rates of return, and we like to show NPV. So you're providing a little broader context and understanding. But what schools are using will vary, and even how much as I noted, what they're paying, how much attention they're paying to their bills is very much all over the map.
Okay, Mark, we're just about at the end of our time, so I have one final question for you that I'll ask on behalf of all of the folks that work with CREATE, that are working with students. You've had a really successful career in energy science that spans multiple decades. The CREATE teachers work with many folks that are just getting started in this field, and I'd ask what advice might you have for people that are just starting out their careers?
Well, I think a couple things. One is get involved if you can with wherever possible with some real projects, and monitor, look at the decisions you made, why you made them, and how those things worked out, because it's that tracking of that real world experience through time that you both learn from, and hopefully you can tell very powerful stories from, because you can see what people are doing, why they've done it, how it's worked out. A second thing is, I know some of your people are very strong in your on the electrical side. You're in the technology. I would encourage people to spend some time and also understanding the financial side, because you can build a lot of wonderful solar systems, which we need to see all over, but I would urge people to be thinking in terms of what are some financially optimal situations to be in. Because if you're dealing with doubters or detractors that don't want to do renewable energy, for whatever reason, having that understanding of the financial arguments that are on our side, if you will, is a powerful complement to that technical side. And we find all of our installers are very savvy on that, on the financial as well as the technological side.
Well, with that, we'll conclude our webinar today, Mark. Thank you very much for the time that you spent and for sharing your expertise with us. I'll give one more plug for Mark's book, The Inevitable Solar School, which I'd encourage everybody to take a look at. This webinar was recorded, and the slides and the recording will be posted on the CREATE website. So you're welcome to access those, and also to share the link to the CREATE site with anybody else who might be interested in this topic. The website address is easy to remember. It's just createenergy.org. And thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. Thanks once again, Mark.
Thank you. I much appreciate and enjoyed doing this. So good luck with all your work.
Have a good afternoon, everyone.